it contradicts the dream is over that we had on God. I mean, it's all about imagining, dreaming. It's Lennon in the utopian dream state when he does that record. And there's a lot of that returning, I think, on Imagine, in a sense. It is Imagine does try to articulate many of the points that we previously heard on the Plastic Ono Band, but at the same time, it's people like it because it's less harsh and it's less confrontational. Obviously, we all know the sales statistics, and Imagine has now been considered by the general public as been this great, wonderful, all-time great record. But hell, it certainly wasn't anywhere near the quality or importance of the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band album.
Yet although Lennon's outlook across the album may have appeared less confrontational, his hostility was very apparent on the track How Do You Sleep, a candid lyrical assault on his old songwriting partner Paul McCartney. Not only had McCartney taken legal action against his ex-bandmates in an attempt to wrestle free from Alan Klein's company ABKCO, which was now controlling affairs at Apple, but Lennon was also riled by numerous subtle jibes he had detected in Ram. These included an image on the back cover featuring one Beatle riding on the back of another, as well as numerous derogatory allusions he believed were in the tracks Three Legs and The Back Seat of My Car. Lennon's reaction was not only to mock McCartney's cover with a parodic postcard included with the Imagine album, but to attack him wholesale in one of his most scathing tracks.
It seemed a bit poor in contrast to the messages that had come out, like All You Need Is Love and Give Peace a Chance. And it was all about how we could live together in harmony. And you thought, well, if these four guys, apparently, or even two guys, can't live together in harmony, and if there's all these, we didn't really know the details of what had gone on in Apple meetings, but they, as it came out, the kind of the fightings with the Alan Klein and Paul's relations and stuff like that, it did seem a bit sad that the people that had, extolled the virtues of love so loudly didn't seem to be able to even keep their own house in order.
He really likes to take the strong words to make the song strong and make it really. He wanted to really let steam off, and that's what he did. I think it's valid, and I know that lots of people must have been very upset that John writes a song about his Paul in that sort of way. But that's the way he is. You have all those hassles with Alan Klein and Eastman, and there were dirty things going on. Nobody can really look behind the curtains, and it's impossible for the outsider to really know. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you details to make people look bad or something, because that's no point. The people don't want that really. They want a nice documentary, and I want to know about this, the situation. John was real pissed off. There's no doubt about it. And he had lots of reasons for it, and lots of directions. And that's why he wrote that song.
Even though Paul McCartney was the person who took the breakup of the Beatles the hardest, I think the band meant the most to him. And I don't think he ever really understood why they couldn't just go on being the Beatles. I think Lennon ultimately was the one who was the most dependent, and I think that fueled his anger against McCartney. It was a kind of declaration of independence, not because anybody saw him as tied to McCartney. He felt himself, I think, tied and had to break that. So there's a kind of, all of the railing about, McCartney and that sort of thing, I think was a kind of self-indictment, on Lennon's part, a desire to extricate himself from emotions that he felt. He was somebody who, well, you could see it with you, liked to attach himself to, another person. It was part of what he needed. And even as he could be acerbic and bitter and harsh, there was also a tremendous vulnerability in him. All of that sniping at McCartney, I think, was a way to tamp that down and not feel those fears of being alone and being abandoned. Even if that's what he wanted, I think he still felt those fears, and I think McCartney took the hits as a result of that.
I think it was very regrettable that John recorded How Do You Sleep, because it was very much like somebody who's broken up with their first wife or their first girlfriend, but still had a tremendous emotional involvement with that other person, and so it was really a vicious attack, and it had far more energy and in it, than was needed. Although a friend of mine who was at the session said that Yoko wrote almost half of the lyrics, so it was much more a question of John and Yoko sort of giggling, actually, sort of running in and writing something on the blackboard, because that's where the lyrics were, and then Yoko would run in, write something, and then they'd both have another laugh, and then John would do something else, and it sort of ran away with itself, really, in the way that sort of bullying sometimes can in the playground, and that was pretty much the level it was on, I think.
The track after How Do You Sleep, in which he's just lambasted his former partner, his family, his reputation, his music. He then has a track called How, which blatantly pilfers the suspension chords that McCartney used on Long and Winding Road. So not only is he slagging him off in one track, he's ripping him off in the very next track, in a very similar style.
The Long and Winding Road is this.
Yeah? Everybody recognizes that. So, there you go. Same thing. Suspensions from Long and Winding Road from the guy he's just said was music to his ears.
And while Lennon was busy attacking him on record, McCartney himself was looking for a new working method that would release him from the hermetic environment of a solo career. He decided to start a band, recruiting drummer Denny Sywell from the Ram sessions and longtime friend Denny Lane, a guitarist who had made his name in the Moody Blues. As on Ram, he also decided that his wife had to be part of his artistic life, and he taught Linda to play the keyboard so that she too could be a member of this band. Once formed, McCartney's new group Wings rehearsed and recorded their first album, Wildlife, at Abbey Road Studios over 2 weeks in August 1970.
Paul and I were real, that was the pros. Denny, he was involved with a lot of bands and stuff, but he wasn't involved with kind of like on the spot, make it happen like Paul and I had been. And Linda, of course, she had a lot on her shoulders. She had more than a lot on her shoulders. But we'd rehearsed enough so that we knew the songs, and 5 of those 8 tracks on Wildlife were first takes. We went into Abbey Road and just got our sound and said, let's go. And in fact, the track Mumbo, where you hear it start, take it, Tony! We were like, we really had it going on, and the engineer just sitting up there, and Paul was screaming, take it, hit the button, dude.
Take it, Tony.
It was a fun project, and the vocals did not take long. The mixes did not. The mixes probably took the longest of that. We probably did that within a week, 10 days, something like that. And the whole band was there with our hands on the faders, pushing faders together. It was a a total band effort, you know. So it was the first look at what the band was going to be, because we knew that, you know, everything we did was going to be compared to the last thing they heard of the Beatles.
And on its release in November, the album was not only unfavourably compared to the Beatles, but with McCartney's 2 previous releases. Despite reaching the top 10 in both the UK and the US, Wildlife received a mauling from the critics.
You know, he makes a fatal mistake of just rushing in and doing an album. I think his excuse was, well, Bob Dylan only did things in one take. And you think, well, great, but you're not Bob Dylan. I mean, Bob Dylan already has songs, you know, his lyrics, he's the great poet of the generation. And McCartney doesn't have that. You know, he doesn't write lyrics in that way. I mean, he's a melody man. And for him to go in and, you know, do stuff that spontaneously, it's obviously going to, it may cause problems. I mean, if he's lucky and totally inspired when he goes in, he might get a wonderful suite of songs. But, you know, it wasn't the case with Wildlife.
Wildlife is a disaster, but it's a kind of understandable disaster. Paul's decided to put together a band, and they're jamming away, and he's making the song up, and he hasn't even got any lyrics, and before they know it, they've got this little thing going, you know, that sounds almost like a track when he's finished writing the song. But no, that's going to be the track, Mumbo. He's just going to sort of gibber on, no lyrics, and they've got this little rocking vibe going because, hey man, everyone was enjoying themselves so much, and you can just imagine the band going, I thought we were just, so you're going to be putting that on the first track of the new Wings album? Okay, Paul, well, it's up to you, man. You know, who's going to say, Paul, I don't think that's a good idea. No one is going to say that to Paul McCartney now. That's the problem. Dear Friend is lovely, though. The final track on that album is very lovely, very sad, and again, conciliatory. So it ends well, but it's a, you know, it's a disaster, really.
Dear friend, what's the time? Is this really the borderline? Does it really mean so much to you? Aren't you afraid? Or is it true? Dear friend, throw the wine.
With Dear Friend, McCartney is offering an olive branch to Lennon. Let's not forget, they were really good friends. They were like brothers. And brothers fall out and brothers have fights. But McCartney was big enough to say, okay, look, it's time we got back together. And Dear Friend is a really lovely song. And I really hope Lennon listened to it and heard it and thought, well, okay, you know, let's bury the hatchet. And certainly from then on, relationships within the Beatles become a lot more cordial. And Lennon actually becomes to talk about McCartney in very fond terms. So I think it's an important moment, yeah.
Will they ever team up again?
It's quite possible, yes. I don't know why the hell we'd do it, but it's possible.
Would you like that to happen?
If it happens, I'll enjoy it.
Would you want to initiate that happening?
I don't know, Ellie, because you know me, I go on instinct, and if the idea hit me tomorrow, you know, I might call them and say, come on, let's do something. And so I couldn't really tell you. If it happens, it'll happen. You know.
So it is not something that you would totally rule out as never taking place again?
No, my memories are now all fond, and the wounds are healed, and if we do it, we do it. If we record, we record. I don't know. As long as we make music, you know.
Yet even if the wounds would begin to heal, McCartney's reputation was suffering. Although it was a top 10 album, many felt that Wildlife was yet another disappointment in the artistic decline of one of the greatest songwriters of the 20th century.
And if you compare it with what Lennon was doing with Plastic Ono Band, big statement. I mean, Wildlife comes out at the same time as Imagine, so he's been outflanked commercially by John Lennon as well at this point, which nobody could have envisaged. And we all thought, well, the one thing McCartney's going to do is he's going to be, you know, consistently commercially successful. And of course he was to a small degree, but nothing like he could have been. And the idea that, you know, that Lennon would be outselling him at this particular point, if not at any other time, but at this crucial point where he's 3 albums in and Lennon's suddenly doing Imagine, I mean, you know, Lennon must be thinking, well, you know, I'm the commercial tunesmith here. Look at what Paul's just done again. And it is quite odd when you look back. I mean, there's always something wonderfully self-destructive, I think, about it when you look back. That you know, Paul McCartney presumably must have some awareness that he can do a lot better than this, because it begged the terrible question: is McCartney washed up? Is he ever going to do a decent song again? And those were questions that people were asking at the time. It didn't make sense to a lot of people. That was the other thing. It really didn't make sense. How can arguably the greatest tunesmith of the 20th century, right up there with you know, Rodgers and Hammerstein when he was Lennon, does this mean it was all, you know, that without Lennon he just can't do it? I mean, that was a question that more and more people were starting to ask. Like, there's something very wrong here, you know. Maybe he really did die, you know. Maybe Paul really did die in that car crash that they're talking about. I mean, this sounds like an imposter. It doesn't actually sound like Paul McCartney. It kind of sounds like him, but the work isn't up to his quality. There was a general feeling, I think, that something had maybe gone terribly wrong here, and nobody could quite articulate what that was.
Despite the negativity following the release of Wildlife, McCartney persevered with Wings. In February 1972, having recruited guitarist Henry McCulloch to broaden their sound, they set off on an unconventional tour of the UK.
No gigs, no hotels, no nothing, except a lot of fun. Wives, kids, dogs in the transit van. Ian and Trevor in the bigger van with the gear. Just set out, find a place to play and play that night. There were times we'd pull into a university and they'd say, do you have a place we could have a dance or a concert tonight? You know, student union or mess hall or anything. And they said, well, I don't know. He said, we got Paul McCartney out there. He goes, yeah, right. He said, come here. Drag him out to the Paul. Paul would go, yeah. Yeah, okay. So the first tour, the kids got to see us for 75 pence. A couple hours after we showed up. Then we'd go find a hotel while they were like, Ian and Trevor were setting up the gear. Hang a few posters around the campus, and we'd go find a hotel, come back, not even a sound check, we'd just come back and do the show. And we had crap PAs, you know, like it was like a rented, everything was like, but it was fun.
And although the tour found Wings bonding as a band and gave McCartney the opportunity to rediscover the naive energy of his early gigging career, the press in particular took issue with his decision to enlist his non-musician wife as a band member, and Linda became a target of derision. For McCartney, however, her inclusion was essential.
He just had to sue his other mates, you know. He just had to do the unthinkable, and Linda was the only one that he could trust, you know. And I don't think she wanted to be there either, too. The night that we started the European tour, I remember backstage, she crying on my shoulder. I mean, I'm scared shitless. I can't do this. Yes, you can, girl. Come on, you know what you've got to do now. Let's get out there and do it, you know. She was there because he needed her there. I think eventually she wanted to be there, and she grew into it. But, you know, when trying to pick out parts on the piano and sing in tune and all of the horrible stuff that, you know, yeah, she didn't have like a perfect pitch voice where she could sing these parts correctly all of the time, and she wasn't a trained musician, but she had it in her heart. She knew what was good and bad. And, you know, Paul always would double her vocals and try to bring them into pitch as much. She was there for him, you know, more than for anything.
Why would he ask his non-musician wife to play keyboards? Well, you know, at the time, of course, everybody thought he was completely mad and indulgent. Paul was a family man. He was a rock and roll, he was a musician, but he was a family man. And he just wanted his family with him. And it's the most bizarre, eccentric way of doing it, but somehow it as a gesture of solidarity with his partner, it's absolutely, you know, without precedent. Who would do that? except John Lennon. Paul and John did it. They both played with their misses. They were both Beatles. They both had enormous reputations. And the next thing they did was go out with their misses. Nowhere else in rock and roll does that happen. And it's kind of sweet, actually. It gives me a little warm, fuzzy feeling. I think it's good. Good for him. It all turned out all right in the end. Who would have thought it? How they laughed at him.
And while McCartney had been forming his band, Lennon and Ono had also required a change of scene. In August 1971, they had moved to New York City, and here they had been welcomed with open arms by the counterculture, particularly prominent activists Abbie Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. While many of the musical figures who had been linked to the anti-war movement and to the radical groups surrounding it had distanced themselves from the political landscape by the turn of the decade, Lennon and Ono remained outspoken and very public ambassadors for peace, and they soon became heavily involved in various campaigns. In December, the pair performed at a freedom rally for White Panther leader John Sinclair, released the Christmas single Merry Christmas, War is Over, and played 2 tracks at a benefit concert for families of victims of the Attica State prison riots. And the following month, fully capitalizing on their celebrity, they appeared as guest hosts on Mike Douglas's popular daytime TV talk show, inviting on a range of notable countercultural figures to discuss issues that had previously never reached such a large mainstream audience.
John Lennon's week of hosting the Mike Douglas show in the United States is a phenomenal moment in the history of television as well as in the history of pop culture. Nobody had ever tried this before. In a way, you have to give Mike Douglas credit for turning over his daytime TV show from the usual kind of entertainment trivia to these wild people, John and Yoko. And then the people they bring on, Bobby Seale, head of the Black Panthers, Jerry Rubin, anti-war leader.
No, what's different in you and the movement? Like, let's say people thought the movement had died, you know?
Yes. What is the movement?
What is the movement? And B, did it die? And what are the differences in it now than 4 years ago?
Yeah,
Can you
okay. Wow, I
explain
need
that?
an hour. Well, the movement is everybody, I hope, watching television. You know, it doesn't have any narrow definition.
Beautiful.
You know, and it's all the black people who are right now in jail who I know watch the show, because when I was in jail, the show was on. You know, and so I want to give a love call to all the black people who are now in jail, and it's all the students and all people that believe that this country is, since it's capitalist, is inherently oppressive, and also tries to dominate the world. I was in Chile this summer, and I saw how the United States dominates the economy of Chile. Now, the way the movement's changed is the rhetoric has gone calmer, because the repression is so heavy that anybody who does anything gets arrested, jailed, killed, that people are like very pessimistic. Wherever you go right now, there's
You mean youth in
pessimism.
general, whether they're radical or anything, just youth in general? We
Yeah.
notice that amongst youth.
Just totally pessimistic.
Whether
There's
there's
no hope.
political youth or just musical youth, there seems to be such an atmosphere of apathy around them that how do we change that, you know?
These people don't go on TV. TV is a mainstream, middle-of-the-road, white-bread institution. And, of course, millions of people watched it who normally wouldn't get John and Yoko's message, and that's exactly what they wanted to achieve.
And this activism fed back into Lennon's art. Backed by young New York band Elephant's Memory, in February he began work on a new album which would reflect the myriad struggles of the oppressed and document the numerous injustices perpetrated by the state. The first single to be released from these sessions was Lennon's feminist statement, "Woman is the nigger of the world." Yet the title alone fueled outrage, particularly from black audiences, and radio stations across America refused to play the record. Cut off from the normal promotional avenues, it failed to reach the top 40 in the US and was subsequently withdrawn from release in the UK.
Woman is the Nigger of the World was a song, of course, inspired by Yoko. Part of Yoko's lesson to Lennon was the lessons of women's liberation, that women were oppressed, women were unequal, women needed freedom like everybody else. And Lennon understood the logic of this, and being a songwriter, decided to write a song about it. He called the song "Woman is the Nigger of the World." Of course, this was misunderstood as somehow a slur on black people. First of all, it wasn't very successful as a song, and the fact that it offended people made it even a bigger problem. So another experiment that failed.
Woman is the nigger of the world. Yes, she is. Think about it. Woman is the nigger of the world. Think about it. Do something about it. We'll make her paint her face and dance. If she won't be a slave, we say that she don't love us. If she's real, we say she's trying to be a man. By putting her down, we pretend so hard that she's above us.
They were using nigger as a metaphor for the lowest of the low. The song actually says that woman is a slave to the slaves. So even when you have a slave society, women are still oppressed. But it wasn't a good idea to use the word nigger. It was a very brave thing and a very foolhardy thing for Lennon to do. But Lennon believed that he'd recorded a #1 single.
I think there's a hell of a lot in there that, you know, you might have well been being prodded into it by, you know, by the old woman. I don't know, but I think it's from the heart. I think it's got a lot of power to it, and it's a fantastic record. I think it's the best record Phil Spector ever made with John Lennon. I think it's a really, really powerful record. And you know, there are a few lines in that I just think that still resonate with me today. I just occasionally think about them. We make her paint her face and dance. I mean, that's never more true than now.
In June, sometime in New York City, Lennon's third post-Beatles album was released. Once again produced by Phil Spector, but featuring Elephant's memory in place of the assorted musicians of the Plastic Ono Band, the album differed from its predecessors in that it was split between Lennon tracks and Ono tracks. And Lennon's compositions were essentially protest songs, including tracks concerning the imprisonment of John Sinclair and Black Panther associate Angela Davis, the Northern Ireland conflict, and the government's response to the Attica prison riots. The album met with an unexpectedly hostile critical reception, while fans expecting the beauty of Imagine or the introspection of the Plastic Ono Band album were sorely disappointed, and it failed to reach either the top 40 in the US or the top 10 in the UK.
Lennon gets drawn in to American politics. He's very politically engaged. The problem is he's writing news headlines, and yesterday's news is tomorrow's fish and chip paper, and it doesn't last. If he could have recorded those songs in the same way he recorded Instant Karma, if he had put them out, written it, recorded it, put it out that day or that week, it would have been fine. But by the time he writes this body of work, gets it recorded, then gets it issued as a record, everything he's written about isn't news anymore.
People were saying, well, is Angela Davis that important to be writing about anyway? Isn't this a bit limiting? It's always going to be forgotten in about 6 months, and the songs are going to be forgotten with it. And the worst of all was considered to be John Sinclair for that reason, because it was all about free John Sinclair. And people going, well, great, but you know, by the time the album came out, it already was free. So you know, the song was redundant even before you heard it on a record. And that was the problem, was that these songs seemingly were for the moment, and then it would be forgotten forever. And that wasn't what art was about. And even, you know, John Lennon backtracked himself and said, maybe it was too much journalism on those songs and not enough time on the art. My response would be no. Paradoxically, it was a record that seemed to be trapped in time. But I think time has been kind to it and has actually liberated it. It no longer matters that we don't remember particularly John Sinclair. It's all to do with the song and the performance. What I'm reacting to is Lennon's exuberance in that song.
We came here not only to help John and to spotlight what's going on, but also to show and to say to all of you that apathy isn't it, and that we can do something. Okay, so Flower Power didn't work, so what? We start again. This song I wrote for John Sinclair. key. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Time has freed those songs in the sense that it doesn't matter that you don't know who John Sinclair is. He just becomes a symbol in himself, you know, a metaphor for the outlaw. And what John is constructing here is something which is in the grander tradition of the outlaw song. It actually helps that we don't actually know who they are anymore. A modern audience doesn't have to know who they are. They just think, well, if they're important to John Lennon and he's that passionate about them, that's what I'm reacting to. I don't want historical accuracy. I don't care if these people were villains or they weren't villains or not. It's the story in the song that matters.
While the tracks John Sinclair and Angela were more specifically targeting the injustices of the American government, the songs Luck of the Irish and Sunday Bloody Sunday were focused on the actions of the English establishment.
The Irish songs on that are naturally very intriguing to me. I mean, Sunday Bloody Sunday and Luck of the Irish, for different reasons, are a wonderful indicator of the way Lennon would write a political song at the time. You must remember this is in the context of the IRA in '72, the bombing campaign had started. So Lennon was vilified in not just the mainstream press, but even in the